Also in this year, we saw the creation of agencies, Europol, Eurojust, Frontex, the new IT agency, databases. Now this gets us a long list. Europol, Schengen Information System, Schengen Information System 2, Visa Information System for everybody visiting the European Union, giving them their fingerprints and being security vetted before they're allowed to enter the EU. The PRUM database. Well, it's not a database. It gives access to all national databases covering fingerprints, DNA and vehicles. And when it first started out, some of the smaller member states got into a problem because they built their national police databases to deal with national demand. And such was the demand from the big states like France, Germany, Italy and UK, that it crashed the national police computers. So they were all given a daily limit about how many they could search for. It was that ludicrous. And of course there's more in the pipeline. We're going to have EU PNR system reflecting the EU-US PNR system, an EU SWIFT system of financial transactions reflecting the EU-US TFTP. We're going to have an entry-exit system, everybody comes in and out of the European Union. ESTA, the European system for travel authorization. They won't just be recording where you travel. You will have to get permission to travel. It will be hidden, but there's a system like the United States called authorization to travel. They've got already a European criminal records information system with criminal records on, and they're now creating a European police criminal records information system, which of course information disguises the fact it always contains hard factual information of convictions and intelligence and supposition as well. And if you start giving access to that kind of database, circulating completely unfounded sources, which get replicated and passed on, you're heading for disaster. On top of that, we've got the European Security Research Agenda, which is the security industrial complex developing the European Union. Ben Hayes was saying, which has written the groundbreaking works, Arming Big Brother, the Neoconopticon, and they are the key works showing exactly what's happening in the European Union, which is trying to replicate the US military-industrial complex, not just for the purposes of control, because out of it comes great economic benefit for the multinationals. So we develop the highest level of technology in the European Union. We not only use it in the European Union, we can then market that around the world and go into competition with the United States and with Israel, who are the big people who export their internal control security. Other little indicators is the EU estate. They've suddenly now just a whole agreement between the Parliament and the Council and the Commission and the Parliament, the Commission and Member States. There's a whole system of classification that's been agreed. Restricted documents. And indeed, we have just got a list, which we're going to publish quite soon. But the number of restricted documents actually deposited in the Council over the last 10 years now numbers over 112,000. That is ginormous. It's a ginormous number of documents, the majority of which are not listed on the register. What are other indications? Well, the EU has a seat at the United Nations as regional power. The EU has signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, quote, as a non-state entity. Well, every other member is a state entity. The Commission has got now the European External Action Service has now taken over all the Commission missions in the world, all 180 of them. But it's turning them into embassies. Now we know, if you go from a mission, which is to do with economic power, education, health, etc., which is the Commission mission, when you go to starting creating embassies, embassies conduct, in the course of time, start to conduct information gathering, intelligence gathering, and everything else we see out of every member state agency. And then we have the EU internal security strategy, which the war on terrorism has morphed into, silently, into the internal security strategy, which is going to be permanent, which will affect all levels of society. European, national, regional, local, all the actors, everyday law and order, every possible threat has to be accounted for. State, regional, local, schools, universities, social clubs, every nook and cranny of political life will go into that plan. That's the background. As all this is going on, let's just look at how academia starts to look at it. The oldest theory, and I know I'm having to collapse theories, and I'm open to criticism for this, is obviously intergovernmentalism. The idea that all EU national governments are in charge and they delegate power to the Commission to get on with things. So the Commission is the agent of the national governments. That was probably true in intergovernmentalism in the Trevor era from 76 to 93. The second most prevalent theory, and I mentioned it before, but it's a combination. It's a combination of supranationalism, which I mentioned, those powers exercised at the EU level, and multi-level governments, MLG, which actually is the same as the old-fashioned pluralism when you actually look at it. It's just the modern version of pluralism. The theory can be described, I don't call it a theory, in many ways, because they all come to the same conclusion, and I'll repeat this more than once. There is no centre of power under pluralism or multi-level governance. Power is diffused. You cannot see power, because there's no state, because they don't have an idea of the state within those theories. That doesn't exist. And they describe, and the other one you have to add to this is network governance theory. It's all the same, pluralism, multi-level governance, network governance theory, and I'm drawing on quite good work here from a Gramscian book that came out last by Jonathan Davis on network governance, which I've drawn on quite a bit. And what network governance is the processes and actors that are part of policy making, offering alternative sources of governing. The EU, under this, is a post-national polity. What the hell is that, a post-national polity? Well, it is. What is it? If it was that, what is it now? Or this cosmopolitanism, which is very popular amongst some people, where power is all centred in Brussels and with the power elites, but because it's made at the European level, it must be better than the laws passed at the national level. What a load of rubbish. In some cases it is, in other cases it is not. In simple terms, MLG sees power and influence scattered between the Council, the Commission, the European Parliament, think tanks, lobby groups, NGOs, trade unions, Tom, Dick and Harry. There is no centre of power within that theory. And as I repeat more than once, this is part of the hegemonic project of laissez-faire capitalism. It's a way of describing things, but actually the power relation hasn't changed. But this makes it looks like it has changed, and academia colludes in that by putting up these kind of theories. Their theories do not match reality. To do that, I think we have to look elsewhere. So I start out, and I go back and I look at Ralph Miliband's book, The State in Capitalist Society, in 1969, when the dominant theory was pluralism. And one of the dominant theorists at that time was Ronald Dahl, was one of the exponents. And he said he could define pluralism as where all the active and legitimate groups in the population can make themselves heard at some stage in the decision-making process. Everybody has equal influence, but that's what that theory says. Miliband argued that mainstream pluralism could not see a state back in 1969. And I would argue that pluralism continued into multi-level governance, into network governance theory. So when it comes up against the state, it's not looking for a state, because it's not part of its theory. It never has looked at a state. It can use the terms, you read Dahl's books, one time it's government, next time it's state, he doesn't understand the difference. He doesn't realize that the government is part of the state. He thinks they're different. MLG, like pluralism, does not take into account the concept of power and knowledge, does not take into account the decision-making process. They were not looking for a state then, and they cannot see it now. Now, I come from a slightly different school of thinking, and again, this is very broadly Gramscian, libertarian socialist perspective, and when I look at the EU, what I can see is four elements: an emerging state, a political system, which is allegedly based on representative democracy, an economic system, and civil society. That is the way I want to try and look at it. The EU state involves and includes state officials, military, police, prisons, immigration, border controls, civil servants, and the courts, exercising effective executive powers. Let's break it down. The Commission is partly an executive because it puts forward new laws. It drafts them and puts them forward. It is partly a state administration. The Council is the most complex. How it gets away with it, I don't know. It is three-headed. It is partly a co-legislator, partly a state administrator, and partly an executive. When it takes its legislative hat on, it goes and sits with the Parliament and negotiates in secret, but the other two hats are undefined as such. The political system, on the other hand, is a bit clearer, because it is the European Parliament. But it includes a third of the Council when they enter it as co-legislators, and its political parties. The economic system I won't go into, that's pretty clear. Civil society is everything outside of the state, political and economic systems. The picture is slightly less clear here because there's a kind of bias between the alleged influence of the Brussels-based NGOs, many of whom have some access but are quite used to acquiescing into the name of the game there, and those outside of Brussels. There are two kinds of civil society NGOs in that sense. Those outside find it hard not to find their views marginalised when they're arguing on behalf of the marginalised and the powerless. And there's this idea around that, well, hang about, but civil society can participate in the decisions. Participate? It's in the Lisbon Treaty. To participate, you have to have equal status. You have to have equal power. You have to have the right of veto. There is no such mechanism in the European Union, given we're talking about a civil society which doesn't even know what is going on, that exists. Or this consultation, which is banned around. The Commission can consult, it can listen to us, and just go and do whatever it thinks or what the member states want. And consultation is consultation. It means you have no power. If civil society does have any influence, it's when it comes together, when it works from the bottom up, which is rare, which can happen, but that is based on the politics of resistance and not the politics of co-option. I think I'm going to skip a page here, or I will never get to the end of my talk. I'm skipping quite a bit here. So let's now apply some of this thinking. I would argue that multi-level governance, network governance theory, disguises where the real power is. It's in the Council and sometimes in the Parliament. But hegemony, let's get the idea of hegemony. Hegemony is always a struggle, not an accomplished fact. And here I'm quoting Davis. It is when a system is prone to crisis in capitalism, tends to generate expectations as a condition of consent that it cannot meet. In other words, the European Union is in a crisis, an economic and political crisis, but has already generated expectations. But to get the consent of people, it has to meet those expectations. If it doesn't meet them, what would happen? Now, we're meant to have a European Union based on free movement. When the idea was first there as one of the four principles, it meant you could travel around the European Union without having to have a passport, without being recorded, without being documented. We have free movement now, but not free movement in the meaning of the founding principle when that concept was created. We used to have a welfare state, now we're moving to a market state. We had an expectation in that early era that the EU would adopt higher human rights standards than other countries in the world, like the United States, that somehow we could be an influence or should give a better example. We know better now from the last 10 years. The EU and the United States on every issue in our field are just like this, with the EU running the show in lots of joint, also secret meetings. And of course with the expectation of a stable euro. I want to give you an example of expectation, which should matter. Under Article 2, it was in Amsterdam, it is now in Lisbon, every member state has to be founded on the values of respect for human rights, freedom and democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. If they do not respect that, under Article 7, they can be suspended from the activities of the European Union. The governments have to come every working party if they have no influence. That is the ultimate power. The only time they ever used that power, or threatened to use that power, when Haider's Nazi party in Austria joined the government. And then they got terribly embarrassed. Oh, we can't do this to a member state. And they quickly withdrew the threat. And yet in the past 3 years, we have seen the rise of nationalist, racist and fascist parties who have moved, but they're still there, from the street to parliaments, and from parliaments into governments. We have nationalist, racist, fascists in parliaments in Italy, Greece, Denmark, Netherlands, Austria, Bulgaria, Hungary, Latvia, Slovakia, Sweden, and in the European Parliament. And in Greece, we've got the stormtroopers of Golden Dawn, who can march through the streets giving Nazi salutes, attacking protesters, attacking migrant communities, with impunity, with little or no protection from the police.